When my son told me they had buried me emotionally years ago, I smiled, walked to my lawyer's office, and filed the paperwork that would make his words literally true. By the end of the month, I was legally dead in the eyes of the law, and he would never see a penny of my inheritance. You won't believe what happened next. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning while I was having my coffee and reading the newspaper. I'd been looking forward to hearing from David all week. At 68, I didn't get many calls anymore, so when my son's name appeared on my phone screen, I felt that familiar warmth in my chest. "David?" I answered, probably too enthusiastically. "How are you? How's Jennifer? The kids?" There was a long pause. Then his voice came through, cold and distant. "Dad, we need to talk." Something in his tone made my stomach drop. I set down my coffee cup carefully. "Of course, son. What's on your mind?" "Jennifer and I have been discussing this for months. We think it's time you understood something about our family dynamic." Our family dynamic. Like I was some outsider looking in. "I'm listening." "The truth is, Dad, we buried you emotionally years ago. You're like a ghost to us now. We go through the motions of having a relationship because we feel obligated. But honestly, we stopped seeing you as a real part of our lives a long time ago." The words hit me like a physical blow. I actually gasped, my hand tightening around the phone. "David, what are you saying?" "I don't understand." "I'm saying that every phone call, every holiday visit, every birthday card you send, it's all just performance for us. We pretend to care because it's easier than dealing with the drama of cutting you off completely." My hand started shaking. "But last Christmas we had such a wonderful time. The grandchildren seemed so happy to see me. We played games. I helped Emma with her homework." "Dad, the kids barely know you. Emma asked me who the old man was after you left. Jake thought you were Jennifer's uncle." Each word was like a knife twisting deeper. I tried to steady my voice. "Son, if I've done something wrong, if I've hurt you somehow, please tell me. I can change. I can do better." "That's just it, Dad. There's nothing to change. This isn't about something you did. It's about who you are. You're just irrelevant to our lives now. We've moved on." The cruelty in his voice was breathtaking. This was my son, the boy I'd raised from birth, whose diapers I'd changed, whose scraped knees I'd bandaged, whose college tuition I'd paid. "David, please, you can't mean this. We're family." "Family is more than DNA, Dad. Family is people who matter to each other, and you just don't matter to us anymore." I felt something crack inside my chest, not just my heart, but something deeper. Some fundamental belief about love and connection and the bonds between parent and child. "So why are you telling me this now?" I managed to ask. "Because Jennifer thinks it's cruel to keep pretending. She says it's like keeping a dying person on life support when everyone knows there's no hope. It's time to be honest about what this relationship really is." "And what is it?" "Nothing, Dad. It's nothing." The line went quiet, except for the sound of my own ragged breathing. In the background of his call, I could hear normal life continuing. Jennifer laughing at something on TV, one of the kids asking for a snack. Life was happening around him while he casually destroyed mine. "I see," I said quietly. "Well, thank you for your honesty." "Dad, look, it's not personal." "Of course it's personal, David. It's the most personal thing in the world." I hung up the phone and sat in my kitchen for a long time, staring at the wall where I'd hung dozens of family photos over the years. Pictures of David's graduation, his wedding, the grandchildren's birthdays. Moments I'd treasured, apparently while being nothing more than a ghost in my own family's life. After the shock wore off, the memories came flooding back. Not the happy ones I usually allowed myself to remember, but the real ones. The sacrifices I'd made that apparently meant nothing to my son. I walked to my home office and pulled out the filing cabinet where I kept important documents. Sarah, my late wife, had always teased me about being a pack rat, but now I was grateful for every receipt, every bank statement, every record of the life I'd built for our family. David's birth certificate was right there on top. born October 15, 1985. Sarah had been in labor for 18 hours. I'd held her hand through every contraction, promising her that everything would be okay, that we'd give this child the best life possible. Underneath that were the hospital bills. Even with insurance, David's birth had cost us $8,400. I'd worked double shifts at the factory for 3 months to pay it off. Sarah had wanted to go back to work, but I'd insisted she stay home with our baby. A child needs his mother, I'd said. So I'd carried the financial burden alone, gladly. The next folder held his school records, every report card, every parent-teacher conference note, every field trip permission slip. I'd never missed a single school event. When other fathers were playing golf on weekends, I was at David's soccer games, cheering from the sidelines. When he broke his arm in 3rd grade, I'd left work immediately and spent 6 hours in the emergency room holding him while he cried. His high school graduation photo stared up at me, a handsome young man with his whole future ahead of him. I remembered that day so clearly. Sarah and I had been so proud. He'd been accepted to State University with a partial scholarship, but it wasn't nearly enough to cover everything. I pulled out the college financial records, 4 years of tuition, room and board, books, supplies, spending money. Even with his part-time job, I'd paid $127,000 over 4 years. I'd refinanced the house twice to make it happen. Sarah had suggested he take out student loans, but I'd refused. No son of mine is starting his adult life buried in debt, I'd said. The wedding folder was thick with receipts. When David proposed to Jennifer, they'd come to us with their dream wedding planned out. The venue alone was $15,000. The catering was another $12,000. Photography, flowers, music, decorations, it all added up to $47,000. Sarah had wanted something smaller, more affordable, but I'd seen the look in David's eyes. He loved this girl, and he wanted to give her the perfect wedding. It's his special day, I'd told Sarah. We'll find a way. We'd liquidated our vacation fund and borrowed against my 401k. Sarah never got the European trip she'd dreamed of, but she'd smiled and said David's happiness was worth more than any vacation. After the wedding, there had been other expenses. The down payment for their first house, $25,000 that had wiped out what was left of our savings. The loan for David's business startup that had failed within 2 years, $40,000 that we'd never gotten back. The new car when Jennifer decided their old one wasn't reliable enough for the grandchildren, $18,000. Then came the biggest expense of all. When Sarah got sick, the medical bills had started piling up. Cancer treatment wasn't cheap, even with insurance. The experimental treatments that weren't covered had cost us $78,000. I'd sold my father's vintage car collection, the one thing I'd kept as a memory of him, to pay for Sarah's final months in the hospice. David had visited exactly 3 times during Sarah's 6-month illness. Each time, he'd stayed less than an hour. It's too hard to see her like this, he'd explained. Jennifer had come once, bringing the children. Emma had been 4, Jake was 2. They'd been scared of their grandmother's oxygen tank and had cried the whole time. After Sarah died, I'd thought maybe David and I would grow closer. I'd hoped that losing his mother would make him appreciate the parent he still had. Instead, the opposite happened. The calls became less frequent. The visits became shorter. The grandchildren seemed more distant each time I saw them. I'd started keeping track, not obsessively, but just paying attention. David called me once every 3 weeks, usually on Sunday evenings. The conversations lasted exactly long enough to be polite, but not long enough to be meaningful. He'd ask about my health, tell me the kids were fine, and promise to visit soon. Those visits happened maybe 4 times a year, always brief, always feeling rushed. But I'd kept sending birthday cards with checks inside, Christmas presents that were never quite right, anniversary cards for him and Jennifer. I'd kept trying to be the father and grandfather I thought they wanted me to be. Looking through all these records now, adding up all the money I'd spent, all the sacrifices I'd made, all the love I'd poured into a relationship that my son described as nothing. It came to a staggering total. $127,000 for college, $47,000 for the wedding, $25,000 for the house down payment, $40,000 for the failed business, $18,000 for the car, Thousands more for birthdays, Christmases, emergencies, and countless other expenses over the years. Nearly $300,000. $300,000 I'd given freely, gladly, out of love for my son and his family. And what did I have to show for it? A phone call telling me I was emotionally dead to them. A son who saw me as an irrelevant ghost. Grandchildren who didn't even know who I was. I closed the filing cabinet and walked back to my kitchen. The coffee I'd been drinking when David called was still sitting there, cold now. Like everything else in my life, it seemed. But as I stared at that cup, something shifted inside me. The hurt was still there. The devastation of his words still cutting deep. But underneath it, something else was growing. Something harder and more determined. If my son wanted to bury me emotionally, then maybe it was time to return the favor. But I was going to do it properly, legally, and in a way that would teach him exactly what nothing really meant. The next few days were a blur of sleepless nights and careful planning. I couldn't stop thinking about David's words, couldn't stop replaying every moment of our conversation. But more than that, I couldn't stop thinking about what came next. On Friday evening, David called again. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "Dad, I wanted to check on you," he said, his voice artificially cheerful. "You seemed pretty upset when we talked the other day." "Upset?" I kept my voice neutral. "Why would I be upset?" "Well, I mean, what we discussed was pretty heavy. Jennifer thought maybe I was too harsh. So this was Jennifer's idea. I should have known." "And what do you think, David?" "I think honesty is always better than pretending. Don't you?" "Absolutely. I've always believed in honesty." "Good. So we're okay then?" I paused, letting the silence stretch. "David, can I ask you something?" "Sure, Dad." "When exactly did I become emotionally dead to you? Was it gradual, or was there a specific moment?" Another pause. "Dad, I don't think dwelling on... Humor me. I'm trying to understand the timeline." He sighed. "If I'm being honest, it probably started after Mom died. You became so... needy. Always calling, always wanting to visit. It was suffocating." Needy. I'd been grieving the loss of my wife of 37 years, and my son had found my grief suffocating. I see. And Jennifer agreed with this assessment? Jennifer was actually more patient than I was. She kept saying we should give you time to adjust. But when you started showing up unannounced, dropping by the house without calling first, I visited 3 times without calling first. Once was when Emma had the flu and I brought soup. Once was when your water heater broke and I came to help fix it. And once was on your birthday when I wanted to surprise you with a cake. Dad, it's not about the reasons. It's about boundaries. We have a life, a routine. You can't just insert yourself whenever you feel like it. So, when would be appropriate for me to insert myself? Since apparently scheduled visits aren't meaningful to you either. That's not what I said. David, you told me that every interaction we have is just performance, that your children don't know who I am, that I'm irrelevant to your lives. What part of that suggests there's ever an appropriate time for me to be involved? The frustration was creeping into his voice now. Look, Dad, this is exactly what I'm talking about. You're being dramatic. You're twisting everything I said. Am I? Let me read you something. I pulled out a notebook where I'd written down his exact words from our Tuesday conversation. You said, and I quote, "We buried you emotionally years ago. You're like a ghost to us now. We go through the motions of having a relationship because we feel obligated, but honestly, we stopped seeing you as a real part of our lives a long time ago." Silence. You also said, "Family is people who matter to each other, and you just don't matter to us anymore." And when I asked what our relationship really was, you said, "Nothing, Dad. It's nothing." Jesus, Dad. You wrote it down. That's really concerning. What's concerning is that my son can say these things to me and then call a few days later acting like it was just a casual conversation about setting boundaries. That's not what I'm doing. Then what are you doing, David? I'm trying to maintain some kind of relationship with you despite the fact that we've grown apart. I'm trying to be an adult about this instead of just cutting you off completely. How generous of you. Don't be sarcastic, Dad. It doesn't suit you. Apparently nothing suits me. I'm too needy when I grieve. I'm too intrusive when I try to help. I'm too dramatic when I remember the hurtful things you say to me. Tell me, David, what exactly would suit me? What version of myself would be acceptable to you and Jennifer? A version that doesn't make everything about yourself. There it was, the real anger coming through. Everything about myself? Like what? Like every conversation we have. You always steer it back to how lonely you are, how much you miss Mom, how much you want to see the kids. It's exhausting. I'm sorry that my grief over losing my wife of 37 years has been exhausting for you. See? You're doing it again, making me the bad guy for having normal human limits. Normal human limits. Is that what you call it when a son decides his father is emotionally dead to him? Dad, stop. No, David. You started this conversation. You wanted honesty. Let's be honest. I could hear him breathing heavily, probably trying to control his temper. Good. Let him be uncomfortable for once. Fine, he said finally. You want complete honesty? Here it is. You've been living in the past for 4 years. Ever since Mom died, you've been trying to recreate something that doesn't exist anymore. We're not the family we used to be. The kids have grown up. Jennifer and I have our own lives, our own problems, our own priorities. And you don't fit anymore. I don't fit. No, you don't. And instead of accepting that and building a new kind of relationship with us, you keep trying to force your way back into something that's gone. It's like you expect us to freeze in time, to keep being the people we were 5 years ago just so you don't have to deal with change. What kind of new relationship did you have in mind, since the current one is apparently just performance art? I don't know. Something less intense, less demanding. You could be like Jennifer's dad. He calls once a month, sends cards on birthdays, visits maybe twice a year. It's pleasant. It's easy. There's no drama. Jennifer's dad lives in Arizona and has 3 other children. He also didn't pay for Jennifer's college, her wedding, or help with her down payment. And there it is. David's voice exploded through the phone. I wondered when you'd bring up the money. Every time you're upset with me, it always comes back to how much you've spent on us. You brought up Jennifer's father as a model for our relationship. I was simply pointing out why that comparison might not be relevant. No, you were reminding me that I owe you. That's what you always do. Every argument we've ever had, you eventually get around to tallying up how much you've sacrificed for me. My grip tightened on the phone. When have I ever asked you to pay me back? When have I ever made you feel guilty about money? You don't have to ask. It's always there, hanging over everything. Every time you're disappointed in me, I can see you thinking about that college tuition. Every time I don't call often enough, you're calculating how much that wedding cost. Every time the kids don't seem excited enough to see you, you're remembering that down payment. That's quite an insight into my thought process. Tell me, David, what am I thinking right now? You're thinking about how ungrateful I am, how you gave me everything and this is how I repay you. You're thinking about what a terrible son I am. He wasn't wrong, but hearing it laid out like that made me pause. Was I really that transparent? Or was this guilt talking? Actually, I said slowly, I was thinking about something else entirely. What? I was thinking about your grandfather. My father. David didn't respond, clearly not expecting this direction. He died when you were 12. Do you remember him? A little. He was kind of stern, wasn't he? He was. He believed in what he called earned respect. He used to tell me that love without respect was just enabling, and respect without love was just fear. He said the trick was finding the balance. Dad, I don't see what this has to do with... He also told me something else. He said that if you ever find yourself begging someone to love you, you've already lost them. That desperation repels people, even people who might otherwise care about you. The line went quiet. I think I've been begging you to love me for 4 years, David, and you're right. It has been exhausting for both of us. Dad, I'm tired, son. I'm tired of performing for an audience that's already decided I'm not worth watching. I'm tired of trying to earn my place in a family that's apparently already buried me. It doesn't have to be like this. You're right. It doesn't. What does that mean? It means I'm going to stop begging. I'm going to stop performing. I'm going to stop trying to force my way into a life where I'm not wanted. That's not what I want, isn't it? You told me I was emotionally dead to you. You said our relationship was nothing. You said I was irrelevant to your lives. What part of that suggests you want me around? I was angry. I was frustrated. Maybe I said things I didn't mean. Or maybe you said things you'd been thinking for years and finally had the courage to voice. David was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was smaller. So, what happens now? Now? Now you get exactly what you asked for. You wanted me to be emotionally dead to you? Consider it done. You wanted our relationship to be nothing? Nothing it is. You wanted me to be irrelevant? I'll show you just how irrelevant I can be. Dad, please don't do anything drastic. Let's talk about this when we've both calmed down. I am calm, David. I'm calmer than I've been in years. For the first time since your mother died, I know exactly where I stand with you. And more importantly, I know exactly what I'm going to do about it. What does that mean? It means goodbye, son. Thank you for your honesty. It's been enlightening. I hung up the phone and turned it off. Then I walked to my desk and pulled out a business card I'd kept in my wallet for months. Harold Morrison, estate planning attorney. It was time to make some very important phone calls. Harold Morrison had been my lawyer for 15 years. He'd handled Sarah's will, helped us with the house refinancing, and guided us through various legal matters over the years. When I called him Saturday morning and asked for an emergency appointment, he didn't ask questions. He just told me to come in at 2 o'clock. His office was exactly as I remembered it. Dark wood paneling, leather chairs, law books lining the walls. Harold was in his 70s himself, a distinguished man with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He'd always treated me with respect, never talking down to me or making me feel stupid for not understanding legal terminology. "Robert," he said, as I settled into the chair across from his desk. "You sounded upset on the phone. What can I do for you?" I pulled out the notebook where I'd written down David's words. "Harold, I need to ask you about something that might sound unusual. Is it possible for a living person to be declared legally dead?" His eyebrows rose slightly. "That's certainly an interesting question. Are we talking about someone who's been missing, lost at sea, disappeared under mysterious circumstances? Number. We're talking about someone who wants to be declared dead while they're still alive, someone who wants to legally cease to exist." Harold leaned back in his chair, studying my face carefully. "Robert, are you having thoughts of harming yourself? Because if you are, we should talk about getting you some help." "No, Harold. I'm not suicidal. I'm strategic." I told him everything. David's phone calls, his words about burying me emotionally, his description of our relationship as nothing. I told him about the years of financial support, the sacrifices Sarah and I had made, the way I'd been systematically erased from their lives while continuing to fund their lifestyle. Harold listened without interruption, occasionally taking notes. When I finished, he sat quietly for a moment, processing what I'd told him. "I see," he said finally. "And you want to be declared legally dead because my son told me I was already dead to them emotionally. I want to make that official. I want to see what happens when I'm actually gone, instead of just being treated like I am." "Robert, what you're describing is possible, but it's extremely complicated and essentially irreversible. Once you're declared legally dead, your assets would go through probate, your bank accounts would be frozen, your Social Security benefits would stop. You'd have no legal identity." "What about my will?" "Your will would be executed as if you'd actually died. Your beneficiaries would inherit according to your wishes." I smiled. "And what if I were to change my will before being declared dead?" Harold's eyes sharpened. "What did you have in mind?" I pulled out a handwritten document I'd spent Friday night preparing. "I want to leave everything to charity, the Alzheimer's Association, in memory of Sarah. David wouldn't get a penny." "Robert, that's a decision you might regret. even if you're angry with your son now. Harold, this isn't about anger. This is about respect. For 4 years, I've been trying to buy my way back into my son's affections. I've been the ATM father, the emergency fund grandfather, the convenient benefactor. But I've never been seen as a person worth loving for who I am. I leaned forward in my chair. My son told me I was emotionally dead to them. He said our relationship was nothing. He said I was irrelevant to their lives. If that's true, then my death shouldn't affect them at all, should it? If I'm really just a ghost they're tolerating out of obligation, then making that status official should actually be a relief to them. Harold was quiet for a long moment. And if you're wrong, if they do care about you more than they've expressed, then they'll have to prove it. They'll have to show that I meant something to them. They'll have to demonstrate that our relationship was more than just performance art. By mourning you when you're not actually dead, by mourning the loss of my presence in their lives before it becomes permanent. Harold set down his pen and looked at me seriously. Robert, I have to ask this. Is there any part of this plan that's motivated by wanting to hurt your son? Any element of revenge? I considered the question carefully. Harold, if I wanted to hurt David, I'd change my will, and then actually die. That would leave him with nothing and no opportunity to make amends. This way, if he realizes he's made a mistake, if he discovers that he does value our relationship, he'll have a chance to prove it. And if he doesn't, then I'll know for certain that his feelings about me are exactly what he said they were. And I'll be free to build a new life where I'm wanted and valued. Harold studied the handwritten will change I'd prepared. This is certainly thorough. You're leaving your house, your savings, your investments, your life insurance policy, everything, to charity. David and his family would inherit nothing. That's correct. And you understand that once you're declared legally dead, these changes would be permanent? Even if you later reconciled with your son, you couldn't undo the inheritance distribution? I understand. There's another issue we need to discuss. Being declared legally dead while alive is typically reserved for very specific circumstances. You'd need to demonstrate that you meet the legal requirements. It's not something you can do just because you want to disappear. What would those requirements be? Harold pulled out a thick legal book and flipped through several pages. The person would need to show that their previous identity has become untenable or impossible to maintain. This usually involves witness protection situations, extreme cases of stalking or harassment, or circumstances where continuing to exist under their current identity would put them in danger. What about emotional or psychological danger? That's more difficult to prove. You'd need documentation. Medical records showing the impact on your mental health. Testimony from professionals about the necessity of this extreme step. I thought about Dr. Patterson, the grief counselor I'd seen after Sarah died. She'd been concerned about my isolation, my withdrawal from social activities, my increasing focus on my relationship with David as my only source of meaning. I might be able to provide that documentation, I said. Harold looked at me with a mixture of concern and respect. Robert, I have to admire your thoroughness, but I also have to ask, are you sure this is what you want? This isn't like moving to another state or changing your phone number. This is legal death. It's permanent. Harold, 4 days ago my son told me that I was emotionally dead to his family, that our relationship was nothing, that I was irrelevant to their lives. He's been treating me like I was dead for years. He just finally had the courage to say it out loud. I stood up and walked to the window overlooking downtown. I've spent 4 years since Sarah died, trying to prove that I was worth loving. I've given money, time, attention, everything I had to give, and it wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough because you can't make someone love you. So you're going to make them miss you instead? I'm going to make them choose. They can have a father who's alive and present and occasionally inconvenient, or they can have the ghost they've been treating me as. But they can't have both anymore. I turned back to Harold. Can you do this for me? He was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Yes, Robert. I can do this for you, but I want you to think about it over the weekend. If you still want to proceed on Monday, We'll start the paperwork. What would be the timeline? With the right documentation and circumstances, we could have you declared legally dead within 30 days. 30 days. 30 days for David to realize what he was losing. 30 days for him to prove that our relationship meant something to him. 30 days to discover whether love was stronger than pride. Harold, I said, shaking his hand, I'll see you Monday morning. That weekend was the longest of my life. I spent Saturday cleaning my house from top to bottom, organizing my affairs, and making lists of everything I needed to do. If I was going to legally die, I wanted to leave things in perfect order. Sunday morning, I drove to the cemetery where Sarah was buried. I'd been visiting her grave every week since the funeral, but this time felt different. I sat on the stone bench beside her headstone and talked to her the way I used to talk to her in life. Sarah, I think I'm about to do something you might not approve of, I said to the carved granite. But I think you'd understand why I have to do it. I told her about David's phone calls, about his words, about the plan I'd made with Harold. The morning was quiet except for the sound of birds and distant traffic. A gentle breeze moved through the trees, and for a moment I could almost imagine it was Sarah responding. I know you always wanted me to be the bigger person, I continued. You always said David was just young, that he'd mature eventually, that I needed to be patient. But Sarah, he's 38 years old. If he hasn't learned to value family by now, when will he? I sat there for 2 hours, thinking about our life together, about the son we'd raised, about the dreams we'd had for our golden years. We'd planned to travel, to spend time with grandchildren, to enjoy the fruits of our decades of hard work and sacrifice. Instead, I was sitting alone in a cemetery, planning my own legal death. But as I sat there, something Sarah used to say kept echoing in my mind. Respect yourself enough to walk away from anything that doesn't see your worth. She'd said that about jobs, about friendships, about any relationship that was one-sided. I'd never thought about applying it to family before, but maybe it was time. Monday morning, I was waiting outside Harold's office when he arrived. He took one look at my face and nodded. You're sure about this? I've never been more sure of anything in my life. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind of paperwork, appointments, and legal procedures. Harold had been right about needing documentation. Dr. Patterson provided a letter detailing my depression and isolation following Sarah's death, and my increasing fixation on my deteriorating relationship with David as my only remaining source of meaning in life. Mr. Thompson presents as a man who has lost his sense of identity and purpose following his wife's death, she wrote. His mental health is increasingly dependent on validation from a family relationship that appears to be causing him significant psychological distress. In my professional opinion, his current circumstances pose a genuine threat to his emotional well-being and potentially his physical safety. I had to provide evidence of my financial situation, including bank statements showing the enormous amounts I'd spent supporting David's family over the years. Harold used this to demonstrate that my current identity had become financially untenable, that I was literally buying my way into a relationship that was destroying me economically and emotionally. We filed a petition with the court explaining that Robert Thompson, age 68, needed to be declared legally dead due to circumstances that made his continued existence under that identity impossible. It sounded dramatic when Harold read it aloud, but it didn't feel dramatic to me. It felt like the truth. The most difficult part was the will change. Sitting in Harold's office, signing the documents that would leave my entire estate to charity, felt like closing a chapter of my life that I'd never expected to end this way. The house will go to Habitat for Humanity, Harold explained as I signed page after page. Your savings and investments will be divided between the Alzheimer's Association and the local food bank. Your life insurance policy will fund a scholarship at the community college for adult learners. What about my personal items, photos, furniture, Sarah's jewelry? Those will be donated to appropriate charities unless you specify otherwise. I thought about the boxes of family photos in my closet, the furniture Sarah and I had picked out together, her wedding ring that I'd been saving for David to give to his daughter someday. David can have the photos and Sarah's jewelry, I said finally. After everything else is settled, consider it a gift from a dead man. Harold raised an eyebrow. You want him to receive those items after you're declared legally dead? I want him to understand what he's lost. The photos will show him the family we used to be. Sarah's jewelry will remind him of the mother who loved him unconditionally. Maybe when he's looking through those boxes, he'll remember what family is supposed to mean. The court date was set for the third Tuesday of the month. Harold explained that these proceedings were usually routine. The judge would review the documentation, verify that the legal requirements had been met, and issue the death certificate. The whole process would take less than an hour. But first, there was something I had to do. I called David one last time. It was a Thursday evening, exactly 3 weeks after our devastating conversation. I'd been officially Robert Thompson for 3 more days. "Dad?" He sounded surprised to hear from me. I was starting to worry. "You haven't returned any of my calls." "I've been busy." "Busy with what? Are you okay? You sound different." "I'm fine, David. I'm actually better than I've been in years. I wanted to let you know that I've been thinking about our conversation." "Good. I've been thinking about it too. Maybe we both said things we didn't mean." "Actually, I think we both said exactly what we meant, and I want to thank you for that honesty." "Dad, you're scaring me a little. You really do sound different." "I sound like a man who's finally stopped lying to himself." "David, you were right about everything. I have been needy. I have been trying to force myself into your life. I have been living in the past." "Dad, let me finish. You told me that I was emotionally dead to your family, and you were right. I've been a ghost in your lives for years, haven't I? Going through the motions, pretending we had a relationship when we really didn't. That's not... it's more complicated than that. Is it? David, when was the last time you called me just because you wanted to talk to me? Not because it was a holiday or because you felt obligated, but because you genuinely wanted to hear my voice." The silence stretched for so long I thought the call had dropped. "I can't remember," he said finally, his voice small. "Neither can I. And that tells us everything we need to know, doesn't it?" "Dad, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that you're going to get exactly what you wanted. You said I was emotionally dead to you. Well, soon I'm going to be completely dead to you. In every way that matters." "What does that mean?" "It means this is goodbye, David. Really goodbye this time. Dad, please don't do anything stupid. If you're thinking about hurting yourself..." "I'm not going to hurt myself, son. I'm going to free us both. You'll never have to pretend to care about me again. You'll never have to take my calls out of obligation. You'll never have to explain to your children who the old man is when I show up at family gatherings." "Dad, stop. This is crazy talk. Is it? You told me our relationship was nothing. You told me I was irrelevant to your lives. I'm just making that official." "Making it official how?" "You'll find out soon enough. Take care of yourself, David. Take care of Jennifer and the children. Be happy." "Dad, wait." I hung up the phone and turned it off for the last time. Robert Thompson's phone would never ring again. 3 days later, I sat in Judge Martinez's courtroom as Harold presented our case. The judge was a stern-looking woman in her 50s who listened carefully as Harold explained the unusual circumstances that necessitated declaring a living man legally dead. "Your Honor," Harold said, "my client has provided extensive documentation showing that his current identity has become psychologically and financially untenable. The relationship dependencies that have defined his existence for the past 4 years are causing severe mental distress and have led to unsustainable financial decisions." The judge reviewed the paperwork, including Dr. Patterson's letter and the bank statements showing my years of financial support for David's family. "Mr. Thompson," she said, looking at me directly, "do you understand that this declaration is permanent? That once I sign this order, Robert Thompson will legally cease to exist?" "I understand, Your Honor." "And you're certain this is what you want?" "Your Honor, 4 weeks ago my son told me that I was emotionally dead to his family, that our relationship was nothing, that I was irrelevant to their lives. He was right. I've been dead to them for years. This just makes it official." She studied my face for a long moment. "Mr. Thompson, the court recognizes that family relationships can be sources of profound pain as well as joy. If this legal action represents your best path toward psychological healing and self-preservation, then the court is prepared to grant your petition." She signed the papers with a flourish. "Robert Thompson is hereby declared legally deceased as of this date. Mr. Morrison will provide you with the necessary documentation to begin your new life." As we walked out of the courthouse, Harold handed me a folder containing my death certificate and the paperwork establishing my new identity. I was no longer Robert Thompson. I was Michael Davidson, a name I'd chosen to honor my late wife's maiden name. "What now?" Harold asked. "Now I wait to see if David meant what he said about our relationship being nothing." The death announcement appeared in the newspaper that Friday. Harold had arranged for it to be published exactly as if I had actually died. Robert Thompson, 68, passed away peacefully on Tuesday following a prolonged illness. He was preceded in death by his beloved wife, Sarah. Robert is survived by his son, David Thompson, and daughter-in-law, Jennifer, and grandchildren, Emma and Jake. In lieu of flowers, donations may be made to the Alzheimer's Association. Services will be private. I spent that weekend in a hotel across town, waiting to see what would happen. I'd given Harold instructions to monitor David's response and report back to me. If David tried to claim his inheritance, we'd know exactly how much our relationship had meant to him. If he grieved, if he tried to understand what had happened, if he showed any sign that he'd lost something meaningful, then maybe there was hope for rebuilding what we'd broken. But if he simply moved on, if my death was just a relief to him, then I'd know he'd been telling the truth about burying me emotionally years ago. Harold called me Monday morning with the first report. "David's been calling my office nonstop since Friday," he said. "He wants to know about the will, about the funeral arrangements, about what happened to you." "What did you tell him?" "That you died from complications related to your prolonged depression, and that there would be no funeral per your explicit wishes. I also informed him that your will would be read this Thursday." How did he react? He was upset. More upset than I expected, honestly. He kept asking if there was something he could have done, if he'd missed signs that you were in crisis. Interesting. If David was just performing grief for appearances, he was putting on quite a show for my lawyer. "What about the inheritance?" "That's where it gets complicated. David isn't asking about money. He's asking about personal items, photos, your father's watch, things with sentimental value. He seems genuinely confused about why you'd choose to die rather than reach out for help." Thursday afternoon, I positioned myself across the street from Harold's office to watch David arrive for the will reading. My son looked haggard, like he hadn't slept in days. Jennifer was with him, and even from a distance I could see they'd both been crying. That gave me pause. If our relationship had really been nothing to them, why the tears? Harold called me that evening with the details. "Robert, I have to tell you, David's reaction wasn't what either of us expected." "Go on." "When I told him you'd left everything to charity, he didn't seem surprised. In fact, he said he'd been expecting it. He said he knew he'd hurt you badly and that he deserved to be cut out of your will." "That's it?" "He was fine with it?" Far from it. He broke down completely. He said he'd been replaying your last conversation over and over, trying to understand how he'd let your relationship deteriorate so badly. He asked if you'd left any message for him, any explanation of what had driven you to such a desperate act. My chest tightened. "What did you tell him?" "I gave him the box of photos and Sarah's jewelry as you instructed, and I gave him a letter." "What letter?" "The one you wrote but didn't remember writing. It was in your handwriting, in the folder with your will." I frowned. I didn't remember writing any letter to David. "Harold, what did this letter say?" "It was addressed to David, and it basically explained everything. Your years of feeling invisible in his life, your grief over Sarah, your realization that you'd been trying to buy his love instead of earning his respect. It was heartbreaking, actually. I realized what had happened. That night I'd spent organizing my papers. I'd been so emotional that I'd written down my thoughts for David without remembering it clearly. Harold had found it and included it with my final wishes. How did David react to the letter? He read it aloud to Jennifer, and they both cried through the entire thing. He kept saying I didn't know, and why didn't he tell me how bad it was? Jennifer said she'd had no idea you felt so excluded from their lives. And now? Now they want to make things right, but they think it's too late. David's convinced that his cruelty drove you to suicide, and he's racked with guilt. He started seeing a therapist to deal with the trauma. I sat in my hotel room that night, staring out the window at the city lights, processing everything Harold had told me. David's grief seemed genuine. His regret appeared real. But was it enough to rebuild what we'd lost? The next morning, I made a decision that would change everything again. I called Harold. "I want to see him," I said. "Robert, you're legally dead. If David sees you, I want to see if his grief is real or if it's just guilt. I want to know if he actually misses me or if he just misses not feeling terrible about how he treated me." "How do you propose to do that?" "Arrange a meeting. Tell him you have something else of mine he needs to see. Don't tell him what. I'll be there, and we'll see what happens when a dead man walks into the room." "Robert, this could backfire spectacularly." "Harold, I've already died once this month. What's the worst that could happen?" 3 days later, I sat in Harold's conference room, waiting for my son to arrive. I'd been legally dead for 2 weeks, but I'd never felt more alive. In a few minutes, I'd know for certain whether David's grief was real, and whether there was still a chance to build something authentic from the ashes of our destroyed relationship. The door opened, and David walked in, still looking exhausted and broken. When he saw me sitting there, very much alive, his face went through a series of expressions: shock, confusion, relief, and then anger. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, looking between me and Harold. "Hello, David," I said calmly. "I hear you've been missing me." If you enjoyed this story of family boundaries and consequences, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Share your thoughts about Robert's decision in the comments below. Was he justified in faking his death to teach his son a lesson, or did he go too far? Let us know what you think happened next in this dramatic family confrontation.